Chili Winds, and another one from Wade Ward is called Blackberry Blossom. Gotta get things in tune a little better. Neatest cat. The cat started chewing on my ankle in the middle of that tune. Which is nice kitty, my friend. I like banjo music. I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana. That's where I was born and raised. And I grew up out in the country on a hill called Sayre Road. There were 5 houses on Sayre Road. It was a dirt road. And I went to a little one-room school about 3 miles from where I grew up called Phillips School. It was on a ridge. So since we were on a ridge, I went to a ridge school, and the kids lived in the valleys, went to valley schools. And the people who lived in the county, Monroe County at that time, now it's Monroe Reservoir. Back then it was all hillbillies from Kentucky who came up to work in the stone quarries because the coal mines went bust and they were starving. So they just got in their old jalopies and they drove up. And just like in Kentucky, when they came to a creek bed, creeks are slate in southern Indiana. They have a shale or slate bed, so you, just like in Kentucky, if you see a creek bed, you take your Model A Ford and you go down the creek bed and you drive up the creek bed, and as soon as it looks like a flat space between 2 hills, you build a house, or you sleep in your car, or however you want to live. So when I was growing up, I was born in Bloomington. Age of 3, my parents moved. They did what I was born in 46, so in 1949, there was one of those early interests in moving to the country so you could raise your family in the country, and my parents did it, and so did the head of the chemistry department, whose name was Wilhelm van Wagendonk, and we lived 2 houses down from Wilhelm van Wagendonk, the famous Dutch chemist. And I grew up going to a one-room school with a bunch of hillbillies, and I'd come home and be around my parents, who were college-y kind of people, and Wilhelm van Wagendonk, and all these interesting people. We had hillbillies on the road had 5 houses. It was probably, 3 miles long, and so the houses were quite far apart. We had some local folks, and just all kinds of people lived on Sayre Road. There are now 400 houses on Sayre Road. But the little creek below our house was Jackson Creek, and I was a ADHD kid before they invented ADHD, and so I'd go down to the creek in the mornings, and I'd just spend my whole days down there looking for turtles and crayfish. And I discovered that if you went down the creek and went down the creek for miles and miles and miles, you ended up down in Morris Creek Valley, and there were super hillbillies down there who lived in their cars and lived in little shacks, and they played fiddles and banjos, and I just liked music, and so I'd pick up any tunes I could while I was out roaming around. And there was a blind couple that played on the steps of the 5 and 10 cent store in Bloomington. Bloomington was a courthouse in the center with the only surviving businesses facing the courthouse. And they played in front of the 5 and 10 cent store. Their name was McDaniel, and he had a cigar box fiddle, and she had a cigar box mandolin, and they'd sit there and play tunes. And every time my parents would go to town, which was about 4 miles, I'd make a beeline to the McDaniels and stand there until my parents would grab me by the arm and drag me away. And they'd play these wonderful little tunes, da la 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 la, and I just got all these tunes in my head. So I was full of tunes, and at the one-room school, people would jump rope and play games, and half the kids, more than that, 3/4 of the kids at the school, the one-room school, were kids from people who'd moved up from Kentucky, either immediately or in a past generation. And they had all these tunes in their heads. So when we played dodgeball and all kinds of stuff out in schoolyards, out would come these amazing little tunes, and these kids would just, do the tunes. I never was really fascinated by the words. I was a tunes guy. And my parents, being college people, realized, this guy's interested in tunes. He needs trombone lessons. So Jim Hewitt became my trombone teacher when I was 10 years old. Poor Jim Hewitt. I feel so sorry for him because I had all these tunes like, just all the Kentucky tunes in my head. And here I'm playing tunes like songs my mother taught me and all these things on the trombone from music, and learning bass clef, which is really helpful if you're a 5-string banjo player, and all this stuff. And so I was torn. I really liked music, but I really didn't want to go oompa the rest of my life. So my parents, being brilliant, said, bassoon, that'd be a good country instrument. So I had a year of bassoon lessons after that, and that was, not exactly what I had in my head. So we moved when I was 14. My dad lost his job, went to Baltimore County. So from a little teeny one-room school to a consolidated school in Bloomington to University High School in Bloomington, and then at the age of 14, whammo, Baltimore County to a school of 1,500 kids was huge cultural shock for me. It was just amazing, the difference. People were throwing stuff out in the trash cans in Baltimore County that the richest people in Bloomington never knew existed because these things never got to Bloomington. When I was a kid, Sears and Roebuck was where you got everything. You got your banjo from Sears if you had money, and there was nothing there. As I started playing music a little bit and getting around, I have all these amazing memories, and I sometimes would tell them to my wife Barbara, who's sitting back there.
Do you think you could stand up when you talk, because people back here really can't see you?
Okay. I can. I'm old, I'll stand here. After we had been married, Barbara and I got married in 1979, and we had been married for a couple of years, and Barbara decided it was time for me to meet the person that I had never met, who was born and raised in downtown Washington, D.C. And she wrote out her childhood memories. And it was fascinating. And I thought, wow, imagine being able to write your childhood memories. You wrote 50 pages of childhood memories, something like that. And I thought, I don't have any childhood memories, really. I mean, I just it's a big snowball. And I said, well, I remember actually, before we moved, when I was 3 years old, I remember I was on a sled going down a hill, and I went underneath this car, and then the lights went out. And so I decided to I remembered the walk in front of our house. And then I remembered the walk went up to the door, and then you went in the door, and there was the hallway that went to the bathroom and the piano, and the living room was on the left, and then our bedrooms were on the right, and then there was the kitchen, and then the garage, and all this came back because I started remembering the first thing I remembered, which was being knocked out on the differential of a car. And it all came back, about 80 pages of it, and it was really neat. So I'm encouraging you all within hearing distance, if you want to have an incredible experience in your lives, just remember the first thing you can remember, and it will come back faster than you can type, write, or speak it into a tape recorder. It's just, once you open the door, there's a kid inside, somewhere in this area, who has, as they say, kids are the world's best observers and the world's worst interpreters. You've observed an amazing amount of stuff, and it's all in there. You just have to start writing it down. And it's the neatest thing, because when you get done, you start realizing, gee, I was a busy kid. I wasn't dead all those years. I was doing stuff that I just never thought about organizing and retaining. So anyway, lecture number 1, write your childhood memories. So, I made a list of things, all kinds of things. There was the school bus would come around and pick us up on Sarah Road, and it would go through the valleys and go up on the ridge where the Phillips School was. And Lambkin's Ridge and Moore's Pike was where the school was. And it would stop at Jones's Trading Post. And Jonesy was a really incredible hillbilly kind of guy who realized that in the wintertime in Bloomington, Indiana, it goes down to 15 below zero and people freeze to death because they don't have any heat and they don't have any money. So he just opened up his trading post, which was just a roadside store. He had a wood-burning stove, and the trading post was probably the size of that room and this room and probably the front door. That was a whole building. But he had a wood-burning stove, and he had a fiddle and banjo and guitar hanging on the wall all the time. So when people got too cold and realized we're going to freeze to death, they'd go to Jones's trading post. And it was known as Honey Jones's trading post because everybody who came through the door, Mr. Jones would say, "Hey, honey, what do you want?" Unusual greeting for guys, but that's what he did. And everybody was honey. So Honey Jones's trading post, it really was. And when I was a kid, Junior Hardy was the banjo player, and probably Matt Walker was a banjo player there, and for sure he was a fiddler. And they were Kentucky guys. And banjo was either thumb and index style in the early days when I was around banjo guys, or a very simple sort of what they called knockdown style, because you're knocking down your hand. And they'd play tunes, and they'd give them funny little names like I remember they called what's that called? Flop-eared Mule. That was called, because it's G and it goes to D, that was called G and D rag. What's a rag? But that's what they called it. This is a brand new banjo. It's an old shell with a lovely neck that was completed exactly 1 month ago. And so it's sort of getting used to me, and I'm getting used to it. The whole neck was made by Wyatt Foley made the blank, if you're a banjo person, and Glenn Carson in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania did all the carving and all the pearl work and everything. And if you want to see it anytime after I'm done playing it, it's here for your looking at. The shell is a Vega shell with a tubaphone tone ring, and Sears didn't have any kind of tone rings when I was a kid. You'd see crummy banjos everywhere. And a lot of the banjos in the Bloomington area, when they mailed them to you in a box, am I supposed to stand up again, Barbara? Okay. When they mailed your banjo to you in a box, if you ordered a mail order banjo, this is the bridge. And because the bridge, if you hit it, would break the head, they'd always put the bridge on the side. And they never told you where to put the bridge. So people would get their banjos and put the bridge up somewhere, and then they'd put the frets, and nothing ever sounded right, because it actually, mathematically, this has to be exactly the same distance to the 12th fret, which would be here. This distance has to be exactly the same as the 12th fret to there. So if you put the bridge too far forward, forget it. It's going to sound horrible. So people would just take a pair of pliers, pull the frets out, no problem. So many good stories. Around. It was sort of bum chunka bum chunka bum chunka. And I always just heard more notes, but that was just me. Went to Baltimore County and had those tunes in my head. Those are the kind of stuff that I had in my head. And I was kind of frustrated because the school I went to wasn't a whole lot of fun. It was just a lot of people. And I was used to like real intimate feelings with all the teachers, and everybody knew each other in the school I went to, University High School. They had a reunion a couple of years ago, and they're expecting 200 people to show up. 700 people showed up. This is a small school where people have been graduating from 1938 to 1965 or something when they closed the school, and there weren't a whole lot of people graduating every year, so they figured nobody's going to care. They put out this little flyer saying, anybody who ever graduated from University High School, Bloomington, Indiana, we're going to have a reunion. And people came from Europe. I want to go back to that school. So in Baltimore County, I was lost, and I started finding stuff and working on stuff, and I was getting by. And then one day, the big turning point in my musical career was when I was in 10th grade, and there had been a kid who I'd been sort of curious about because he walked around the halls on his hands. He was a member of the gymnastics team, and he liked to go between classes walking on his hands, which just makes him different. And I went into the boys' restroom in 10th grade, and there was Wilbur doing a handstand over the urinal playing the harmonica. And I said, you can't do that with a bassoon, and you definitely can't do that with a trombone or all the rest of the instruments I'd been having lessons on. But there's a guy who's having fun. I mean, weird fun, but fun. And he was playing a tune I knew. And so I collared Wilbur later and I said, where do you live? I want to play that stuff. I don't want to play in the boys' room. I just want to play that kind of stuff. And he said, well, I live right over the hill from you, down in Valley where Warren Road goes across to Lock Raven Boulevard and Lock Raven Reservoir in Baltimore County. And we play music every Friday night. Come on down. So I said, I'll be there. And I went down there and bingo, his neighbor had an old banjo hanging in the garage. And I tried playing guitar, didn't work. Tried playing the harmonica because Wilbur loaned me one, that didn't work. Tried playing everything. Banjo was as Pete Steele says, everybody has their instrument. The hard part is figuring out which instrument is yours. And for me, it was banjo. So I picked up the banjo and I started playing these tunes. And I thought I was a really big, hot banjo player. So I graduated from high school in 1964, and I said, I'm going back to Bloomington, Indiana, to become a folklorist, go to the Indiana University Folklore School. I'll be happy the rest of my life. Boom, went out to Indiana, walked in and said, I want to major in folklore. And they said, I'm sorry, Sonny, but you can't do that until you're a graduate student. You have to take, this prerequisite course and all the rest of that stuff. And I said, but I know all the people who play music around Bloomington. They said, sorry, you can't have a car. You can't have a car until you're a graduate student, blah, blah, blah. So I said, on that. And the first thing that happened was a guy named Peter Hoover was playing the banjo in a local cafeteria on campus. And he had a banjo called a Vega tubaphone. And I, walked by, and here's this guy holding his banjo, and he was playing his tune. Double thumb style and doing all this pulling off stuff. I had no idea what he was doing. I just was, I remember he was just sitting there playing, and there were people walking around. I walked around behind him to see where the rest of there was a lot of notes that I never knew were in the banjo, that he had them all. And I said, what is that? He said, it's a banjo. I said, I know, but it's doing things that no other banjo in Bloomington has ever done. There's notes coming out. Where's the note coming from? And he said, well, come over to my apartment. I'll play you some tunes. And I went over to his apartment, and he sat there and played 2 hours worth of just solo banjo tunes. And he had done a lot of collecting in Southern Virginia and been to lots of functions. And he also was 7 feet tall, which helped open a lot of doors. Because if you're 7 feet tall and you go knock on somebody's door and say, hi, I'd like to talk about folk music, people say, come on in. Yeah. And so he was a tremendously overwhelming force for me. And so I decided I better drop back and punt, rethink my banjo greatness, and I was completely humbled by Peter Hoover. So I just sort of worked on the banjo a lot on my own and tried to figure out how do you get your thumb to do all that stuff. And So I basically left my freshman year due to the fact that I had become a banjo addict. And I stayed out for a year, and I went back and tried Indiana University again. I got the same, no, you may not study folklore, no, you may not have a car. And I'm sitting there on a park bench on the campus of Indiana University with my banjo, thinking I was pretty hot stuff, and along comes a guy carrying a guitar. And I said, oh, hi, do you play string music stuff? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, where are you from? He said, New Jersey. And I said, okay. And he said, I just won the Philadelphia Banjo Contest. My name's Dan Gellert. And there went the next freshman year at Indiana University, was playing music with Dan Gellert. Dan got A's, I got, out. And it was really worth it. It really was, maybe not financially, but spiritually, I had met the two most amazing musicians of that time. There was a guy named Richard Blaustein who was playing fiddle on campus, and Art Rosenbaum would come to parties, and there were just so many. Peter Aceves was a blues player who was there. Neil Rosenberg was on campus. Joe Hickerson was there. Maine Smith was there. Shall I keep on naming them? There were about 20 people on campus, and at the parties, 19 of them were normal, and Dan Gellert is really, really a very high energy person, and in those days was even more energized. And Dan became my hero because Dan had this drive. I got my technical, opening from Peter Hoover, but playing stuff and experimenting came from Dan Gellert, who was just, I don't know how many of you know who I'm talking about. One or two, it's half a dozen. Dan was a Bob Dylan fanatic who, Dan got a harmonica holder and learned how to play the harmonica and sat down and played the piano and the fiddle and the banjo, guitar and mandolin and everything. And then he decided, well, actually, if the banjo can be played in the key of G, then you ought to be able to play the key of G minor, and you can play, why don't we do Bessie Smith with harmonica rack playing blues, clawhammer banjo while singing, it never ends. Anyway, so I spent a lot of time with Dan. So that's sort of where my banjo technique came from. And then I went in 1967, they invited me to come down and look for musicians in Whitesburg, Kentucky area, and then pay me $25 a week to walk the hills and look for the old guys who were still playing music. So that's what I did for the summer of 1967. And I started going to banjo contests and meeting all these characters. And then I decided to move back to Washington, D.C. area. And I lived there in Kensington for years. And I got involved in antique cars, which are another part of life. And all these wonderful musicians would come by the house that I was living in then. People like Jean Carignan, the famous Canadian fiddler, who came to the house, knocked on the door, and said, I need a place to stay. Can I stay here for a while? And he said, sure. And I said, what would you like to do while you're in Kensington? He said, I collect pipes. Where are smoking pipes? And so here's Canada's greatest fiddler at the time, and myself going off in a Model A coupe to look for stores that sold smoking pipes, And just endless stories. Highwoods used to come and spend a week there, and I had a chance to meet a lot of these interesting characters. Okay, let's go down to some. I just made a list of song tunes that I have a CD out, and we have everything else but the list. Well, so much for that idea. There we are. I'm in G. Here's from the McDaniels. This is Redwing, a tune they used to play, and I just added all the other technical stuff that I know. to be able to play a musical instrument. It's fun. It's also fun to have a fiddler. And at bluegrass things, for the bluegrass photographer back there, at bluegrass events, the banjo player has to sweat blood because the banjo plays pile driver stuff, and if you make a mistake, there's always somebody one step behind you who is coming up the ranks who is better. You know? So it's a really difficult living making, playing bluegrass banjo. But in old-time banjo, the fiddler is the person. If you're playing in a group, the fiddler does the work, and the banjo player can actually just sort of play chords and get away with all kinds of stuff. So I like to play finger stuff, but not nearly as much as playing old time, because it's a party on the banjo when you're playing old time style. Here's one that is from a fellow named Frank George. I knew Frank George in 1967. I met him at the Bristol, Tennessee Fiddlers Convention. This is I better start checking off these ones that are. There's Redwing and Sandy River Bell. Frank George took us down, my sister and myself, to meet a fellow named John Hilt. John Hilt, this is back in, we're talking 1967. And John Hilt lived way down the valley, where nobody went, and he had total privacy. And John Hilt was a wonderful old gentleman who carved peach pit things. And I'll pass this around. And you can admire what John Hilt carved in 5 minutes at a Fiddlers Convention, probably Union Grove or Galax or something one time when he was there. He had a pocket full of peach pits and his pocket knife, and he'd carve one and say, "Here, make sure I get it back." That's all I ask. Carved from a peach pit by John Hilt. John Hilt, my sister took her camera wherever she went, thank goodness, and she took lots of pictures. And John Hilt said, "Want to see me call my cow?" And it's like mountains, it's like the redwood forest, except there aren't that many, but you could see for valleys and just, there was nothing out there, just this hundreds of acres. And he said, "Cow!" And we just said, "Okay," and he said, she heard me, and we said, "Okay," and he said, "You got your camera, I'll show you how to feed the birds." And he said, "Stay here by the house, and I'll go out to the stump." And he went to the stump, and he took some nuts he had there, and he just took a hammer and cracked them. And the sound of the hammer on the cracking the nuts, all the birds that could hear it came to the trees around his clearing. And they just came down on his shoulders, and on his head, and on his arms. He just fed them on his hands and put the, not me, and my sister was taking pictures, because nobody's going to believe this, And we're watching him feed the birds, and here comes this speck. This cow was coming over the mountain. And we waited another 10 minutes, and finally the cow just walked up to see, "Why did you call me?" And so John Hilt said, "Want to see me call the trout?" And we said, "Sure, we've blown the last two. Well, let's go for a perfect score." And he takes a limb and goes over to a tree that's growing in the stream by his house, and goes clong on the tree, and the vibrations in the roots go down the water, and here come all the trout. And we said, you know, some people live by themselves and just are bored. John Hill was never bored. He had peach pits, he had trout, he had his cow, he had all these things to just keep himself entertained. He was a really great guy. Anyway, I got on that whole story because of what's his name. When I started playing banjo, there was a guy named Billy Fair who put out a record in 1958 or something. And I was in college, and this guy who was a banjo enthusiast invited me over to his apartment to listen to a Billy Fair record. And I thought, you know, I'm hot stuff. Who could Billy Fair be? Billy Fair was one of those guys who just, you put the record on, you go right or backwards, plop. And Billy Fair put out a record called The Art of the Five-String Banjo the same year, 1958, as Pete Seeger put out How to Play the Five-String Banjo. Billy Fair's record was written in music. Pete Seeger's book was written in tablature, sold lots of copies. Billy Fair never made it much, and Pete Seeger is still a famous guy. Billy Fair is still alive, lives in Texas. But on this record there's some tunes that are beyond description as far as complexity, because he was a classical guitar player who just took a whole lot of knowledge of how to do chordal stuff within tunes. But here's a simplified, my version of a tune he calls the Downfall of Paris. I just think it's a great tune. There are actually 3 parts. If you ever see a copy of the record called The Art of the Five-String Banjo by Billy Fair, it was put out in 1958, kind of a low-selling thing because it didn't fit in any folk niche, but it's a fabulous bunch of tunes. One of the tunes he plays, green corn, da la da da, green corn, da la da da, green corn, da la da, green corn, simple, right? And then he's going, at the same time. And you say, there's got to be 2 banjos doing that. So when Barbara and I were in Florida, I don't know, 8 years ago or so, we're down in Marathon, Florida, and there's a guy carrying a long neck banjo case through the parking lot. And me being shy, of course, I ran up and tackled him. And turned out to be Billy Fair. And he opened up his long neck banjo case, and of course out fell all these CDs and things. Good banjo players always carry a lot of stuff in their banjo case, and out fell out, all stuff. And I said, that is just you playing one banjo on that tune, Green Corn. He said, yeah, it's easy. I just need one person to play it. All these years since 1958. Okay. I'll just play some fun tunes. Here's one fun tune called Jenny Lynn Polka. My brain, come on. it's a great dance called a circle dance. They call that the patty cake polka tune, where you form two circles and you go dun 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 dun, and then you move opposite directions, and pretty soon you've met everybody in the whole place.
Mixer.
It's a great mixer. One time, Dudley Loftman and the Canterbury Country Orchestra came to Washington, D.C., and they said, would you play banjo with us? I said, sure. Don't ask twice. And so I went over, and Dudley Loftman got up in front of everybody and said, okay, everybody form a circle and go clockwise. And everybody formed a circle, and they all had digital watches. Clockwise is this way! Who would have guessed? In the whole room, nobody would know which. Come on. Temperance Reel. Really fun moving tune on the banjo. So Peter Hoover told me that he was driving through Hagerstown, Maryland in the late 50s, and he stopped at a gas station. And this guy at the gas station looks in the back of his car and says, "Is that a banjo?" And Peter said, "Yeah, it is." And the guy said, I can play it too." And so Peter got the banjo out, and the guy said, "This is called a marching Jaybird." And he played this little finger picking tune. So I started going steadily to Galax and Union Grove in the 60s. And it was an interesting time because you had the southern people who were really southern and the northern people who didn't know what to expect when they got down to the southern festivals. And I was caught between because I was Baltimore and Bloomington at the same time. And people like Butch Robbins and Jimmy Arnold were the young and up-and-coming southern kids, and you had people like Winnie Winston and Frank Greathouse and other musicians coming down from New York City, and it was interesting to see the different worlds collide. And you always had, who's the guy who drives a van and brings all instruments from the north?
Sprung.
Roger Sprung. People don't understand that in Bloomington, Indiana, $2 million couldn't have bought a Gibson Mastertone banjo when I was a kid because they never made it there. And people in Galax, Virginia had to travel a whole lifetime to find a big city where they could buy a good instrument. And in the late 60s, here came this guy with a van from Connecticut named Roger Sprung. And he'd show up with these amazing instruments from Connecticut. And nobody had ever had a chance to get to Connecticut to ever even see them. And here came Roger Sprung with a van full of instruments. I just, I knew in my heart that Roger Sprung was doing a great thing. But the selling people thought, he's ripping us off. He's charging us these incredible prices for these banjos when we can go to Sears and get one for under $100. And what he was doing was selling them at Connecticut prices to people in the South who never had even seen an instrument of that quality. So what happened, and it's really kind of ironic to have lived through seeing all this, friends of mine used to basically, sell their tractor to get a decent instrument from Roger Sprung. And everybody would say, you bought from that, so-and-so who came down and charged you all that money? And they said, yeah, because, that's the only way I can get a decent instrument. Those instruments that he sold 30 years ago and 40 years ago at Galax, Virginia for $1,000 are now bringing $75,000 to the same people in the South who bought them for $1,000 40 years ago. So it's an interesting irony to watch. And Roger's still bringing them down to, I was at Clifftop Festival a month ago or so, and there was Roger Sprung still at the festival, still in the banjo contest, placed third or something. I don't know. Such an amazing guy. So many years, going to so many festivals, and feeding good instruments to people at northern prices, which are northern prices, but they're cheap. If you can't get them at all in the South, to have this one person just keep on bringing them down there has been a great blessing for many, many people. Anyway. So let's see. I'll play a nice tune. This is a really simple tune. It's a good tune. It's called My Old Home in Baltimore. If I hadn't found this old geezer and learned from him, it'd be gone forever. This is from a guy in Philadelphia who was one of maybe the only black banjo player I ever met who just, somebody said, oh, he plays the banjo. I went to meet him and he said, oh, I play banjo. Don't have one. And I gave him my banjo and played this tune. He said, this is called My Old Home in Baltimore. He said, no, just a tune, My Old Home, Baltimore. I said, where are you going? He said, I don't remember, just one tune. And I said, your relative, Mr. Flinger, said that you play string music. And Homer was the first person I ever met who he wasn't going to let any information out until he knew whether you were worthy. He wasn't going to set the hook and get involved unless you were worthy. And so he looked at me and said, well, why do you ask if I play music? And I said, well, I'm interested in music. I like banjo tunes and stuff like that. And he said, well, I don't know. Charlie told you I played music, huh? And I said, yeah. And he said, no, I don't know why you say that. I don't know why you say that. And he said, I got to go get some eggs for my chickens. You want to help me gather the eggs? And I said, sure. Sure. And we went out to his chicken roosts, and he had probably 20 little roosts of chickens, and he said, just reach under there, they may peck you, but it won't hurt, just pull the eggs out. And I pulled out a doorknob. Yeah. I pulled out a white porcelain doorknob, and the next chicken had like a rock under it. And I said, what are these? And he said, well, the chickens lay more if you put something that looks kind of like an egg under it. And so we pulled out some chicken eggs, but we also pulled out a lot of rocks and doorknobs and pieces of glass and whatever looked kind of white and polished. And and Homer decided that since I had been, kind of interested in his chickens, he'd maybe play music. So he said, I can't tune my banjo anymore because I'm really kind of old and I really can't tune it. But I'll go get my banjo and my guitar out and we can talk. And so I went to the door and his wife Isis gave me the guitar and the banjo and we sat on the porch. And he said, when I was a kid, there was this guy who lived up on the ridge, which was known as Scarcely Any Fat Ridge. But in Hoosier talk, they called it Skasty Fat Ridge. And if you go there now, it's still called Skasty Fat Ridge. And Skasty Fat Ridge had a guy who played guitar. And when Homer was a little kid, this guy played some kind of classical for music stuff. And Homer never learned to read music, so he just learned it in his head. And he said, this is called the Sevestapol March. And I had heard of a guy named Charlie Poole, who was a musician, so I figured maybe it was, that kind of Charlie Poole's brother or something, who knows, Sevestapol March. I heard Homer play it, and I loved it. It just went right into my brain, and there it sat for years. And I never could figure it. I never knew it was in my head at all. And I was in Kensington, Maryland, years later, and somebody put a guitar in D tuning, and guitar and banjo are the same in D tuning. And suddenly, the whole tune came back, and I said, give me that guitar, I gotta play something. And this is the Sevestapol March, and nobody else ever recorded it, as far as I know, so it's kind of unique that I found this one little tune that's such a pretty little tune. And it stayed in my head, and suddenly, out it came, Sevestapol March. So I put that on my CD. I got a phone call from a guy who said, "Hi, my name's Rick Heckler. I really like that Sevestapol March tune." I said, "Thank you, I do too." He said, "I'm married to Homer's granddaughter." I said, "Damn, that's cool." He said, "Tell me how to play it." I said, "Okay." So I told him over the telephone, and a week later he called back, and when I picked up the phone, it went on the telephone, and he had it note for note. And I said, "That's what it's all about." And he said, "Not only that, but Debbie and I are putting on the Spriggs Fest in Bloomington, Indiana, at the old Spriggs 800-acre home place, and we'd like you to come out and play that tune on Homer's old banjo and on Homer's old guitar." And I said, "I'll be out." So I went out and I did that. And the first year they had a couple hundred people, family members who told their friends and stuff, and everybody came down to Spriggs' old farm. And Homer had sliding panels, and all the walls were full of spinning wheels that had been disassembled, and all the irons. Everything that ever went down Spriggs Road from ground zero was in the walls of the house, the ice house, the barn. Nothing ever left. There was no trash collection. They didn't have any trash. It was there in the walls, insulating everything. And the people who lived there, Homer had died, his son had died, and Bill, the grandson, had never really known Homer that well before Homer died. So I went around, showed him these panels and as much as I can remember. And it was just really fun to be out there. And the next year, it's a banjo case. So,
Not a litter box.
magnetism of a different kind. So, they had the first festival, they had the second festival, they're up to about number 10 or 11 or 12 or something. Now, it's such a valley event in the Brummels Creek Valley area. They have 3 parking lots, cars, old cars, and tractors. So on September 13th, we're gonna be there at Springs Fest. Again, this will be the second time back there, and it'll be so neat to see all these people because my playing Homer Spriggs' tunes and remembering as much as I could inspired other people to start collecting family stuff in that valley. I don't know if I have a soap turtle. It's actually out in my car right now. I'm going to take it out to the Springs Fest. When I was there one time, Isis had made a little needle point. I guess it's a little teeny fine thread. When you make soap in the old days, it tends to disappear really fast. And if you put it inside a needle point thing, it'll stay. You won't rub off as much soap. And so she made me a soap turtle for a bar of soap. And she said, I can remember the words to the Soap Turtle song, but I don't know the tune. And so I have her writing on a piece of paper inside my little soap turtle to take out there and once again put up and say, there's the soap turtle, and there are the words. Does anybody remember the tune? I've checked everywhere I can think. We closed the case. And I'm hoping that somebody will remember the tune to the Soap Turtle song.
Are you gonna tell the sequel to the Sylvester March? You found out the title?
Sevestapol.
Oh, yeah, I went to Washington DC and I played it for the Folklore Society and somebody said, oh yeah, that's a Russian tune called Sevestapol. Thank you. I don't know when I'm supposed to take a break, when you want to take a break, whatever. I'll tell you another story. I've done some really colossal, stupid stuff in my life. And one of the real gems that I will carry to my grave. It was one time I played the Jenny Lynn Polka for some group of people, I don't remember which it was, and an elderly woman came up to me and said, I have Jenny Lynn's old guitar from 1890s, if you'd like to see it. I live on Massachusetts Avenue and I'll be glad to show it to you. Massachusetts Avenue is where houses are the size of castles. It's the place where all the embassies are. And here's this lady who owns a house on Embassy Row, Massachusetts Avenue. So I, being about 18 or 19 years old at that time, and very unworldly, took my time going to visit her because I didn't feel like, big deal, And so I finally went to visit the lady, and she takes out this wooden box and opens it up, and there is this Jenny Lynn guitar with every word, every song, and pictures, and everything from 1890s and 1900 and stuff. And she says, I live here by myself. I have no relatives, and if you'd like the guitar, you can have it. And I said, I'm really most interested in banjos. I left without the guitar. And I've been back to that house many times. And the people who live there now just close the door in my face and say, go away. I have never discovered what happened to Jenny Lynn's guitar, or all the pictures, or all the articles, or all the stuff. But I have done some colossally stupid stuff in my day. So that's probably one of the real good ones. So I'm not a finger picker much, but there are some great finger picking tunes out there. And one of the really early New Yorker guys to go down to Union Grove win the banjo contest in front of all the southern guys was Winnie Winston. And Winnie was just a wonderful banjo player. And you always knew Winnie when he came to town because his license plate was Wombat. I mean, how can you hide a license plate like that in North Carolina? Down from New York City would come Winnie and he'd play tunes like this. Twinkle Little Star. Just a simple little tune with a simple little name. And Winnie would play, and Butch Robbins would be there playing, and all these really hard pile driving banjo players, and Winnie would just never fall over. He'd just keep on playing all night long, and they'd have these different banjo players, and just sort of playing all night long. And I just remember Winnie just standing there, just playing and playing and playing, and pretty soon Winnie was considered one of the boys. And all these people who came from the north, pretty soon, I can't think of some of the names, but pretty soon they were accepted as being okay. Those guys were okay. And that was it was really great to be on the peripheral circles and watching all this. It took time, it took a lot of picking, but pretty soon the New York guys were okay. A record came out called New Dimensions in Bluegrass Banjo by Eric Weisberg and Marshall Brickman in 1960 something rather. A couple of banjo leaning against a tree, little kids standing on that record. And my sister was working for WFIU radio station in Bloomington, and they didn't want any of this junky hippie music on the air, so they just take all the banjo stuff and throw it in my sister's direction, and she'd just bring it home and give it to me. And so I had a chance to listen to all this stuff. And one of the really fun tunes is called Black Rock Turnpike. Is that one you've heard? No comment back there.
No, not ringing a bell. I'm sure we'll start playing it.
Marshall Brickman made up the tune, and it's really neat because it goes C, C, G, C, G, C, G, C, G, C, and then there's this funny note, C, F, C, F, C, F. And somehow Marshall Brickman figured out how to throw in a note that didn't belong, and it made the tune fun. Started coming back to the festivals a couple years ago out of the dark past. Eric Weisberg started coming to the northern, there was a thing called Banjo Camp North, and one day I was up there teaching banjo, and this guy came up and he opened the trunk of his car and he heard all these banjo parts. The whole trunk was full of banjo parts. He said, I want to get rid of all this stuff, got all this banjo stuff. Nobody recognized Eric Weisberg after all these years. It's been a long time. And he picked up his banjo and played Little Rock Getaway and all this other stuff, things that he made up in 1960 something or other. Great to see him again, just great. So, is it time for a break now? What do you want to do? Oh, somebody wanted me to play a tune. Somebody wanted me to play, what was the tune somebody wanted me to play?
House Carpenter?
House Carpenter. I tuned up my second string. So instead of being in a straight G chord, I can now remove this finger and I can play a C chord like that. But also, it's sort of, to me, the banjo is usually tuned to an open G. So I've now taken it and it's no longer an open G. It's in a halfway between a G and a C. And you can do all kinds of neat stuff, like House Carpenter. House Carpenter I learned from a wonderful lady named Dorothy Rourke who lived in Galion, Ohio. And she used to come to Union Grove, and then I went to visit her house a couple of times, and she was just a wonderful, wonderful lady who just played gorgeous banjo and sang songs. Well met, cried a house carpenter. Well met, cried he. I've just returned from the deep salt sea, and it's all for the love of me. Carpenter. A lot of the ballad stuff from North Carolina is played in G modal or mountain. They call it mountain minor, or there are a whole bunch of sawmill tunings. If you go to banjo books and stuff, and people are talking about all those, it's all G modal. Just tune up your second string, and suddenly a whole different world of feeling comes into the tune. Okay, here's one from Phillips School Playground. I have no idea. When I was a kid, we knew it as Charlie's Knee. It was a tune about a guy's knee. We knew no words. It was just about a guy's knee. You know, I got older and played it in where people knew more about tunes. They said, no, actually, that's Bonnie Prince Charlie of Great Britain. It's Charlie's Neat, which made less sense to me than Charlie's Knee. Charlie's Knee.
part?
Any hard ones you want me to play?
They would be alive.
I haven't played that in a long time.
Oh,
That starts my whole book of Pete Steele stories we're going to talk about now.
We take a break now.
yeah, 30 alive.
Whenever people, if you're getting, some people say you have to make the decision, sir.
Oh, now's a good time. We've been going for about an hour.
Yeah.
If you don't have his CD yet, it's an awesome CD. There's some on the sideboard. I highly recommend it. Among banjo players, it's considered one of the best CDs out there. I would definitely recommend picking it up. Maybe we should take a break and come back 15, 20 minutes. And a lot of food.
We drove from Washington D.C. in case you didn't get that message.
Model A.
No Model A's. I am a car nut though, so I warn you. We have a 3-wheel 1900 Knox, which is the most fun car to drive in the whole wide world
Oh my gosh.
when it runs. Most of the time it doesn't run, but it's really fun.
Waterless.
What's that?
Knox waterless.
Knox waterless Porcupine engine, 4.5 horsepower. And it has a 1900 vintage 1902 Anderson glass plug. It's a horizontal engine with 2200 pins driven into, they're threaded into the cylinder, the Porcupine cylinder. And with a spark plug sticking out the back, when it's running, every time it fires, if you're standing behind the car, it lights up the inside of the entire cylinder, and you can look at your cylinder from behind your car. And it's your own little light show and stuff like that, wacky stuff. Last year I took it to Hershey, and it ran okay. It was a good girl. And on the way back to the parking lot, it stopped running, and I got out of my car and I looked over in the weeds, and there was a hubcap in a depression in the grass next to the highway from the 1903 Pope Hartford that a guy had just spent $1 billion restoring and was a national first prize winner at Hershey. Here, this is the biggest car show in the country. And here's my little putt-putt, and my car broke down, and I look over there, and here's this hubcap, which this man has made 4 or 5 of them for his car because they don't exist. And here's one of these hubcaps that came off his car while he was driving it back on the highway to go to his motel, And here's this priceless hubcap, and I go, oh man, is this guy gonna be dying when he gets back to his trailer and discovers that there's a hubcap missing off his car that has just left the show, the show's over. So I got on I have a cell phone, and I called the headquarters of the show, and I said, I think this guy's name is, I forget, lives in Connecticut. I said, I need his home phone number now. And they said, who is this? I said, look, cut the crap. I need this guy's phone number. This guy is going to have a stroke when he gets to his trailer and finds out that his hubcap's missing. They said, okay. And they gave me his home phone number, and I called his home, and his wife answered, and I said, I have the hubcap. And she said, he is in bad shape. Quick, call him on his cell phone. And I called him on his cell phone, and he answered and said, hello. And I said, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. I have your hubcap. Happy birthday to you. He said, where? Just in the field, my car broke down, and I got out, and there was your hubcap. He said, I'm on my way back to Connecticut. Mail it to this address, and name your price. And I said, I just feel so lucky that I could be the one to find your hubcap because my car was, we were all pre-1905 vehicle guys, and I was able to do him a priceless favor. G modal by tuning that up 1 fret, and then I drop this down to 2 frets, so I can play a C chord instead of playing with those fingers. I can eliminate this finger and that finger, and I can play a C chord with 1 finger. Banjo players are basically very lazy. That's how these tunings evolve. That's my theory. temperamental. Every time you tune one string, it puts a different amount of pressure on something on the bridge, which makes everything else go crazy. So if I back up one fret, I'm in C modal. The tune is called Sally in the Garden. I don't know why, there are lots of tunes. I guess when you have a neat tune and you need a name, you just call it Sally in the Garden. I know Sally in the Garden G, Sally in the Garden up C. I was in Philadelphia many years ago watching television, and a high school band played some wonderful tune called Gatsby Reel. Dee da da doo 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 doo. And I said, that's gotta be a banjo tune. So on Christmas Day many years ago, my sister and I decided to go for a drive. And my parents live in Baltimore County, and we decided to just get in the car and go for a drive in the country. And we ended up at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Strange place to go for a drive, but that's just where we were. And there was a store. So I went in, and the guy had gray hair. Good sign. I said, so when you were a boy, who played for the dances here in Aberdeen Proving Grounds? And he said, well, they're all gone except for Pearl Walls, and she lives down that road right over there. And she's in that little house, and she's by herself, and it's Christmas Day, and she'd probably enjoy the company. Why don't you go down and say hello? So we went down and visited with Pearl Walls. And there's a book on clawhammer banjo by Barbara somebody or other, and on the back page, I think it is, there's a picture of a lady in front of this blurry thing in the background, and that's Pearl Walls in front of her Christmas tree. And my sister, of course, had her camera and took lots of pictures. And years later, when my sister was contacted by Mail Bay Publications, my sister had taken thousands of pictures of strip mining in southeastern Kentucky, and they weren't interested in any information or anything historical. They just wanted the pictures because they would sell. So the picture says pearl walls or something or other, I don't know, but it, you know, it's Christmas Day. That's not even the picture. That's kind of important to that picture, I thought. So anyway, pearl walls came from Banner Elk, North Carolina. And I said, really? That's where you're from? She said, yep. She said, I got a fretless banjo up in the attic and a fiddle and a guitar, but I haven't played them in years. Why? I used to play the fiddle and the banjo for the dances around here. And I said, Banner Elk is where, do you remember when you were in Banner Elk, was there a guy who played around that area who was blind, a kid who played guitar? She said, yeah. I said, well, I think he got to be pretty well known. Was he one of the Watson kids? And she said, yeah, there was a Watson kid who was blind who played around there. And I said, well, he's got some records out. She said, oh, go on. Get out of here. She said, oh, come on. So she said, I'll play my favorite tune on banjo. She said, yours has those things. And I said, yeah, they're called frets. And she said, what are they for? I said, well, they stop the string. And she said, well, I never. Why would you need them? You don't need them. Mom doesn't have them. I said, could I see your banjo? She said, no, I'm not going to get out of the attic. And I never saw her banjo. And she liked to play tunes and just work. I call it working the fifth string. She just left her thumb up there. As long as she wanted to play. Johnson Boys. Creek, Kentucky. He said, my mother played the banjo, climber style, knockdown style, whatever you want to call it, and she picked the thumb, not only on the thumb string, but she'd take her thumb and play the second string backwards. And that's the way she played the banjo. And I said, do you remember any tunes she used to play? He said, yeah, one called Red Dress Girl. So this is from Ernest Adams in Pert Creek, Kentucky. Lived in Hamilton, Ohio, straight across from Bloomington, Ohio, and Pete had a rather major drinking habit. He'd go into the bars and leave his banjo as collateral, and then he'd not go back. He'd come borrow a banjo from Paul Pell and then go to a different bar. So Paul got pretty frequent phone calls from Pete Steele saying, hey, I'd like to come visit you. So Paul was always building banjos. And this wonderful, wonderful banjo player would come visit, and Paul would call me up and say, he's coming. He and Lily will be here tomorrow. Come on by. So I'd go by, and Pete was just full of stories. He was so amazing with the banjo that when Barbara and I went to visit him, I asked him, would you just take your hands and put your hands down on your banjo and let me take a picture of your hands so people will realize in generations to come that you really just have 4 fingers and a thumb in each hand. You don't have like 8 fingers and 3 thumbs in each hand. And he said, "Are you kidding me?" And I said, "No, I want to take a picture of your hands." And so in my banjo case, I have a picture of Pete Steele sitting there with his hands, and he has only 4 fingers and 1 thumb in each hand. So this is a song that he played, which I thought was great. My wife wanted me to play this for us. This is for Barbara. This is called The Couple's Quarrel. This is about the husband who stayed out working on his 3-wheel knocks too late in the garage. Or he's over to Howard Zane's playing tunes till too late. And he comes home and he says, and Barbara says, That's from Pete Steele.
Descriptive tune.
A really fine ballad singer named, what is her name? Jean Redpath?
Richie?
Redpath. Jean Redpath.
Jim Redpath, Scottish.
Yeah, from where? Where was she from?
Connecticut, I think.
No, but she was from Ireland or Scotland.
Oh, she's from Scotland originally.
Okay.
Glasgow area, I think.
Well, Jean Redpath and I were sitting at a table once, and we were talking about childhood stuff. And she sang me the song. It's a ballad. Ballads tell an entire story. This is a very, very complete ballad. And she sang me the ballad, which really goes with that tune. It has a different tune, but the thought's much the same. It goes like this. The king, he had a date. He stayed out very late. He was the king. The queen, she paced the floor. She paced till 4:30. She met him at the door. God save the king. That tune came to me 30 years ago. It's called Barbara's Tune. That's a tune that came to me, I think, the first day I met my wife. It's the first tune on my CD. What tunes do I know that you've heard me play? What should I play for you?
You do the Cackling Hen.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's out of a G-tune he is, isn't it?
Guy named McDaniel lived down the hill from my parents in Sparks. He lived in Cockeysville, Maryland, and he was a Southern Virginia fiddler. Lived in a little cabin. When I was just learning the banjo, I heard about him. I went to his little cabin, and he had a fiddle and banjo, and he needed a better banjo, so I loaned him one of my banjos. And he just played these tunes until I learned the tunes. And he said, "This is called Cackling Hen. It goes like this." He played on the fiddle, and I said, "What am I supposed to? Why did I tackle that on the banjo?" He said, "I'm just going to keep playing on the fiddle until you tackle it on the banjo." And I said, "Phew." So it's a rough one. I put it on my CD, and I was at Augusta teaching banjo, and I was out. Then I was supposed to play for some dance. I'm singing by myself, and along comes John Hartford, and he walks right up to me and he says, Could you play a tune for me?" "What do you want? Are you serious?" And he said, "Do that thing on Cackling Hen." So I said, "Oh, okay." So I played it for John Hartford. Probably one of the most amazing surprises in my life, having John Hartford want me to play any note for him. Prince William. I think of Great Britain every time I hear songs like that, because it's where they came from, I guess. Majestic things like that. And also, I used to go over the London to Brighton run, and you learn all these wonderful expressions when you're in Great Britain. And every time I think of Great Britain, I remember my favorite expression when you're over there with these fancy old cars and stuff. Some of the people are really, really, really wealthy, and they bring their teams to take their cars from London to Brighton. You drive them 60 miles in rain, snow, or whatever. In one day, you have basically 8 hours to go 60 miles from London to Brighton in 1905 automobiles. And so here I am in my three-wheel 1900 Knox, which goes, and maybe goes 10 miles an hour on a good day. And one of the Brits came up to me and he said, "On the London to Brighton run, you have counts, and you have no counts." And I thought that was a great expression. Counts and no counts. So here's one of the British sounding tunes called Prince William. Ward tunes. Wade Ward was just a real gentleman, and I had the privilege of just being around him at different festivals in the late 1960s. Just a good guy. A lot of fun. A lot of good memories of going to festivals and meeting Fields Ward and Wade Ward and Pete Steele and Tommy Jarrell and Kyle Creed and all the guys. There were a couple of them I missed. I missed Hobart Smith. I never met Hobart Smith. I never met Mississippi John Hurt, even though he was living in the Washington, D.C. area when I was. I just was too lazy to get out my fanny and go to a coffee house and meet him. I just never did. I just blew it. Somebody was mentioning Frank Prophet during the break time, and Frank Prophet was around the Washington area, but I was just always too hyper. I was too crazy, and I just couldn't. Frank Prophet played beautiful stuff, but kind of quiet, and I just liked stuff that had more drive to it. Just the way I was. And after Frank Prophet died, I said to myself, "You dummy, you really blew it. He was a great person. You should have met him." And I happened to be at the Model A Ford Club meeting one time, and one of the guys said, I am from North Carolina. My mother went to a festival, some kind of a carving place in 1952, and for $12 she bought a banjo directly from Frank Prophet." And I said, "Really?" And I said, "Does she still have the banjo?" And he said, I guess, you can give her a phone call, here's a number. So I called her in North Carolina, and she said, "Yeah, I still got the banjo, yeah, I paid $12 for it." And I said, "Well, I'm interested in banjos, and Frank Prophet's no longer living. What are you going to do with the banjo?" She said, "Well, I'd like to sell it, to tell you the truth, but I'm not going to sell it for $12. I'd take 20 for it." So I stuck out my thumb in Washington, D.C., kind of hitchhiked down and clear across North Carolina, and I gave her a $20 bill, which is about all I had, in those days, and I hitchhiked back carrying a Frank Prophet banjo, and I stopped by to visit some friends in Chapel Hill, and they told me about another banjo, which was a very important banjo, a little red fretless banjo, which had been in Bloomington when I was in college, and I learned to play a couple of tunes on it, and then the guy had to give it back to Mrs. Herndon, who lived in Chapel Hill. I went over to visit her, and she said, "Yeah, I still got that little red banjo," and she said, "There's a fretted banjo in the hawk shop, and if you want this one, you can have this one for $20 too." So I gave her $20 for that one, and I hitchhiked up from North Carolina all the way back to Bloomington, carrying two of the greatest fretless banjos in the whole wide world, and I thought maybe Alan Lomax will give me a ride, or maybe Pete Seeger or somebody would, I got a ride with the Burlington, North Carolina Casket Company. Fame was so close.
Where did you learn Twin Sisters from?
From Peter Hoover. Who learned it from Fulton and Sidney Myers, who he, I guess, discovered in the 50s when he was looking for a banjo player. One of the beautiful tunes, Twin Sisters. tell me the names, shout out a name you want to hear.
Chinquapin pie.
Is that the one that goes down?
Yes.
Okay. Got a lot of tunes in there and some of them are kind of messed up.
It's just a perfect tune there.
It's a time bomb waiting to bite.
I think he's got you confused with Scott.
Rose Street? That's not it. How's Rose Street go?
Lydian, da, 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 da.
West Coast thing.
The man who invents pre-tuned strings is going to be a millionaire. Play Folding Down the Sheets if I can get through it, and we'll call it a night. Unless you have other tunes you want to hear. This is a good exercise for all these little tendons and things that are confused.
Can you do Barbara's song one more time? Can you do repeats?
I'm gonna try and get through a Pete Steele tune. So this is a tune from Pete Steele, the wonderful guy who used to come to Bloomington. Never had a banjo. I went to visit him in Hamilton, Ohio a couple of times, and one of the last times I went to visit him, he had cut off the index finger down to his first knuckle on a table saw while building a birdhouse. And I said, well, that's a interesting thing to have happen to a banjo player. I said, how's the banjo playing going? And he said, well, I seem to have misplaced my banjo. I don't know where it is anymore. I heard that one 20 times. And I said, well, I got my banjo in the car. And he said, well, get it. So I got my banjo, and he just played everything he ever played. He just didn't use his index finger anymore. You know, my little eyeballs went "Meow" as he played stuff like this. I just didn't bother using his index finger. He just used a different finger because his index finger was on the injured reserve list and we'll be back later. This is the Coal Creek March from Pete Steele. I haven't practiced this at all. That's quite an experience to play that on a different banjo I've never played on before. It's just really strange. It's been a pleasure playing banjo tunes for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.